Hi guys. Have a good day. So we have a quick question for you.
Oh, yeah. Okay, so every year we do a themed graduation, which your guys will be what, April 30th?
Yes.
And we seem to have a lot of Harry Potter talk around here. I was wondering if that would be a good theme for our graduation. All in favor?
If you have other ideas, don't
Yes.
hesitate to throw those out there to Sarah. In the past, we've done like a luau, we've done a superhero,
We did 90s last
we did
year.
90s, and then I feel like there was one year we also, maybe it was the same year as we did the luau, but it was like a Taco Tuesday, it was on Cinco de Mayo, so we did like Cinco de Mayo situation. So yeah, if you have other thoughts, let us know, because we're gonna start.
Yeah, just email me. I haven't started planning anything yet, but thought that might be a good idea.
We can have a sorting hat situation.
And hopefully you all saw my announcement out of the mini announcements, I apologize, but the ILP sign up. I know it's a while from now, but if you guys could just reserve a time so that we can take the holds off their calendar, stuff, would be great. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Sarah. Just as a reminder, we are still masking, so when you are going through the 5th floor, when you're going through the elevator, when you're coming on any floor with patient care, so anywhere above the 6th floor, you should be wearing your hospital issued mask. Okay? All right, any questions before we get going today? Drop. Okay. So I've redone this series, so we're gonna jump into navigating difficult conversations, and kind of this is our conflict resolution and negotiation series, so it's today and then next week in the 3 to 5 session. And I don't know, I just felt like doing things a little differently this year, so happy to have your feedback. Today is gonna be a little bit more lecture based, but with some small breakouts and some kind of thinking about your own ways in which that you navigate these conversations. And so we're gonna start off with, kind of our objectives are to learn about basic conflict resolution styles, define aspects of what makes a crucial conversation, and then really be thinking through your own approach when faced with these difficult conversations and map those on to the MCH competencies that you're working on. And then next time, we're gonna do a little bit more like hands-on or role play. So this is your trigger warning, heads up, get anxious now, get your head prepared around some role plays for next time. But to be able to start understanding both your TKI, that was sent out, it should not take you long. And my hope is that you have a little bit of time today to do that, as well as your style under stress. So let's go ahead and go to this website on your device or on your phone. www.vitalsmarts.com/style under stress / and then reshare. Now when you get to it, it will show you. Share this for our web learners and Zoom learners. No. Sarah, did I just no, I did not. Did I mess it in? So you will answer these questions, these true/false questions on this Crucial Learning website. There's not too many of them, and you'll hit submit, and it'll spit out kind of an overview for you. You don't have to take this now. I'm just going to give you a few minutes to do this. This is something that I would like for you to do between now and next time. And again, it's very short, but it just gives you an idea of where do you default? Where's your home base in these in these kinds of conversations and situations. So. And then the blue ones, they all have like some. Absolutely. Okay, it looks like some people have finished. Oh, need some help with that, Sarah. Stuck. There you go. Yeah, no problem. Okay, we're not gonna write our results on the half sheet of paper because you can just keep it pulled up. But this is meant to just be a quick idea about where would you default. On the results, it says the lower the score, the better, but really, for me, there's no better or worse. It just gives you an idea of where you are. Similar to the TKI, you'll get your results next week, in a printout form. And there's no right or wrong. It's just the way in which that you can learn about yourself and what is your default? Where do you go when emotionally, where do you go when things get a little bit tense for you? And I will say, I go to a much different place with my husband than I do with anyone else. I see some nods, so we all agree that night. Yeah. So this uses the terminology silence and violence, and the idea is that those are very, very extremes. And we most likely live in kind of this continuum of more in the middle. And we'll talk a little bit more about what we mean by silence and violence as we go through today. So we've kind of already talked about our learning objectives. Let's jump into the MCH competencies. I don't know that there's anywhere in any one of your careers where you're not going to be faced with a challenging conversation, a challenging problem to solve, disagreeing opinions. So I could have put every leadership competency up here. But when we think about self, of course, you do the self-reflection always, right? Lifelong learning is always about, ooh, I got new information. How do I synthesize that with my previous learning and where I want to go with my goals and aspirations? So this assessment, as well as the TKI and Thomas Komen, that'll give you an idea of, okay, this is where I'm starting from. What am I going to do to either improve because I don't want to be X anymore, or what do I want to keep doing because I want to keep being Y? The other thing about this is the ethics and professionalism. Thinking about how your own discipline teaches and talks about this stuff. I can guarantee you the people in this room that have probably had the most exposure to challenging conversations are our social work friends, right? Because that's part and parcel of their discipline. It's dealing with problems, finding resources to meet the problems, right? Additionally, counselors, psychologists, versus maybe other disciplines, like this is not covered in your curriculum, right? And I can tell you in public health, the only time it's probably covered in public health is in the health services management track. And so you have to think about what do you bring to the table and what can you learn about from other people and others. This is all about critical thinking, right? Thinking through, how do I navigate this? If I choose this path, what will that lead to? If I choose this path, what will that lead to? Relying on the skills we've built and then acting, and then moving forward. Because sometimes what gets us into the most trouble is when we say or do something without much forethought. And then what that leads to miscommunication. And issues with communication is the #1 reported issue in the literature that leads to difficult conversations and interpersonal problems. Surprises no one, right? That is the issue with healthcare sometimes, is the lack of communication. Then when we go out to the others bubble, we have communication. Duh, we just talked about it, right? Listen first, focus on context and content differently. So who wants to help me talk aloud about what is the difference between the context of a conversation and the content of a conversation? Simon, I saw your hand first. Get the mic. Bring up the other one around too, so we have one on each side of the room.
So the content of the argument is literally what you guys are arguing about in that present moment. But then the context is sometimes the things that maybe are issues or things that have been underlying before the content of the discussion even happened. And so it adds a whole nother layer to the things of like what might get discussed or things that get brought up to the situation.
Absolutely. The content of my issue with my husband is, I need you to not buy a car that is always breaking down. The context is, this is exhausting to me and I feel frustrated, and my frustration is accumulating. I use my husband a lot in this because it's just easy. He doesn't need to know I talk about him a lot. He's a really great guy. He just really frustrates me. He gives me a lot of fodder for this talk. But the content is about the car. The context is the emotions around it, right? And when we're really thinking about these crucial conversations, the content doesn't much matter if we haven't addressed the context. In terms of negotiation and conflict resolution, as with anything else, safety first. Psychological safety is just as important as physical safety. No one is going to want to enter into a crucial conversation with you if they feel psychologically threatened. And I'll talk about this later. There's no different if I see a snake on the floor in here than if I see someone I'm intimidated or scared of, right? Your brain tells you the same thing. And I'm scared of snakes. But more rats than anything with fur. Anybody else? Anybody else with me? No? Come on, guys. Wake up today. Wake up, wake up. Okay, so then we have the DEIA. We've talked about cultural responsiveness, how this applies across disciplines and settings. The interdisciplinary team building is just how to play nice in the sandbox, right? That's what we are here for, is how to be good interdisciplinary team members. And a lot of this is the skills that you need to be able to do that. Then, you can't turn on the news without seeing something that has been going on, an issue in the community that is related to two sides differing, right? The school district conversations these days, ooh, they are intense. Anytime you're gonna have a conversation with a school team or community stakeholders, there could be varying ways in which they've learned that how to solve a problem that is completely different than the way you've learned in healthcare or in your discipline. And then also policy and advocacy. Of course, our conversations with policymakers. Quick story, we went to a disability policy seminar many years ago. And it was right around the time that the Affordable Care Act was not law yet. And we tried to share and educate a lawmaker in our state with a really nice set of resources and research related to the benefits of the Affordable Care Act on our Medicaid population here at Cincinnati Children's Hospital. And he said, I don't need to see that. I know it's not helpful. Right? That's a crucial conversation. Then how did we navigate that in the moment? Like, blah, you don't even want to hear at all what we have to say. Well, we have to backtrack, right? Crucial conversation. So you learned this all. You've already learned all this. So anybody ever seen the poster, All I Really Need to Know I Learned in Kindergarten? Some of you haven't. Well, there's a poster. It says, all I need to know I learned in kindergarten. And it's with these statements: share everything, play fair, don't hit people, put things back where you found them, clean up your own mess. Don't take things that aren't yours. Say you're sorry when you hurt somebody. Flush. Take a nap every afternoon. When you go out into the world, watch for traffic, hold hands and stick together, and then remember the Dick and Jane books. The Dick and Jane books were like bull books. The first word you ever learned, and the biggest word of all is love. We gotta get this poster for everyone. We should put this up. Yes, Julie. Give it to Mike.
On the first slide. Sorry, I was just gonna add on the first slide, though, when it says, say sorry when you hurt someone, we used to say, even if you didn't think you did anything wrong, if you stepped on Steph's foot and she screamed, you say you're sorry. I didn't mean to do that, or I didn't realize I did that. But that's another thing too, that I think for adults, just if someone tells you that you hurt them, you say you're sorry, even if you didn't think so.
I know we're gonna get into that a little bit more deeply around apologies and genuine apologies. Genuine, right? Yeah, genuine apologies are much different than generic apologies, right? But so I think the reason that I kind of akin all of this work to the all I need to know learn in kindergarten statements are because we really did practice these. Whether you went to preschool or kindergarten or not, you practiced these in your early childhood years. Then what happened? You started school and you started focusing on academics. And we have to work really hard and advocate really hard to get social emotional learning into the education system in this day and age. But preschool was the time, kindergarten was the time, right? That you learn a lot of this stuff. You learn how to just be amongst a group of people. And that is ultimately some things that as adults we have to relearn or we have to re-practice because we haven't had that practice for a very long time. So I'm gonna kind of talk through each of these and how they apply to crucial conversations. And flush is in there too. Flush. So, everybody know Fred Rogers. Fred Rogers, Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. Now it's Daniel Tiger's Neighborhood because Daniel Tiger was a character in Mr. Rogers. Mr. Rogers, I don't care what anyone wants to say, social narratives and social stories were created by Mr. Rogers, not Carol Gray. He was the one that was creating them back in the 80s. He was writing books about what to do when you go to the dentist, what to do when you go to the doctor, what to do when your baby sister comes home. But he was the guru of social emotional health on PBS for decades. This quote, confronting our feelings and giving them appropriate expression always takes strength, not weakness. So I just want to point out that this is one of the hardest skills, one of the areas that most professionals, including leaders, avoid. They will avoid at all costs things that make them feel uncomfortable related to crucial conversations. Does anybody know how their current mentor or supervisor addresses conflict? Have you had that open conversation with them yet? Some of you are like, yeah, maybe. If you haven't, say, hey, we talked about conflict resolution in Blend the other week. I was curious how you handle conflict in your role. Learn about this. This doesn't have to be a taboo topic, right? Learn about how they approach it so that you can figure out, oh, I would like to kind of take that piece and add it to my practice. It can be overwhelming though. Oh, you know what I bet I did? But I didn't share sound. Yeah, sure enough. Okay, try again. So again, we all learned this in kindergarten. I watched Sesame Street yesterday, the MLK episode with Easton, and I just can't emphasize enough. Sesame Street really knocks it out of the park with everything they do. But this is their take on conflict, and I just think it's fun. So I watch it. Maybe.
Conflict! Right, but I'm afraid that wasn't conflict. No conflict. No, you see, a conflict is when two people fight or disagree
We're a
about
tech
something,
team.
and they have a conflict.
Oh, if you click,
Let's start it nonetheless.
Right, but I'm afraid that wasn't
Robin?
conflict.
No
Let's
conflict.
talk
Oh, you see, a
about
conflict.
with the two-headed monster. And
Listen, two people.
so my point with showing this is if we can teach 3-year-olds what a conflict is, then the next step is how do we handle a conflict, right? The problem is that we have adults walking around with preschool age social emotion skills, right? Anybody ever been around one? Sometimes it's my husband. So we have to recognize that in our workplace. And when we think about how do we resolve conflict, Thomas and Kilman, these were two business level folks that got their heads together and did research around resolution styles. And this has kind of been by and large the styles or the modes are most often used in research related to this topic. And when we think about them, we have 5 that people typically default to 1. So that could be avoiding, accommodating, compromising, competing, or collaborating. And across the bottom axis, the y-axis or the x-axis, we have cooperativeness. So it's how uncooperative someone is versus how cooperative, and that just means how likely, not are they gonna kind of give in necessarily, but how likely are they to even engage in the conflict conversation, right? Versus how unassertive or assertive they are, right? So if you have somebody in the competing mode, they're more likely to be uncooperative. They don't want to participate in the conflict conversation because they just want to be assertive and bulldoze their opinion, right? And sometimes we need that. We'll talk about why. Versus the other side, accommodating, you might have someone that is very unassertive in that situation, but is very cooperative. Okay, I will do whatever you want me to do in that moment. I'm not gonna stand for my own idea. I'm just gonna let that person's idea be what we choose. So we're gonna kind of talk through these a little bit more specifically as we go through. When we think about this idea of cooperativeness and assertiveness, it could be related to how important is this topic to someone, right? Like it could be very important to one person, it could be unimportant to the other. They don't even realize that it's an important, crucial conversation because they're like, gosh, I didn't think this was a big deal, right? Versus this is really crucial, this is life and death. And then you also have to think through whether or not we want to maintain and strengthen relationships, or are we working on towards a product or some substance? And this I can tell you in my experience, where I've run into issues in terms of crucial conversations is when I am paired on a project with someone who is highly product and substance oriented, because guess what, shocker, I'm highly relationship oriented. And so there it's like, oh gosh, I would just rather be accommodating and do the task myself than have it impact the relationship, right? And so think about where you are. Even you don't even need an assessment, right? Are you like, I gotta get this task done, I'm a very task-oriented type A kind of mentality, or are you like, okay, I will do anything to not have somebody be mad at me, right? Think about that kind of dichotomy. So we get to see these 5 modes played out again in preschool. This is one of my favorite videos. Anybody ever seen the You Poke My Heart video? Okay, well, if you haven't, you're in for a real treat. If you have, now you're gonna see it in a different way based on the conflict resolution styles.
My mom told me it was wiggling, not raining. My mother said it is raining. So my mom told me it was wiggling. Because my mom said it's raining. So my mom said it's raining. My mother said exactly it's raining. Now what? You told my mom I said it is. Say sorry to the wiggling. My mom said it is wiggling. My mom is stop. My mom said it's wiggling outside, maybe. My mom is raining. No, it's not. Yes, it is. No, you're pretty. And you're not real. I'm real. But we're going to go out there and see. I'm not going to see it anymore. Let's go. We're gonna go after you and walk. I'm just running! Because it's raining. No, it's not. It's just raining. It's just raining. Ow! It's just raining. It looks like it's raining. You broke my heart. It looks like. You broke my heart. And then I go get honey. And me and no can't do that. Okay. Yeah. You broke my heart. And then
So, obviously, see why I chose it, because it's so precious. But, what,
yeah.
come back, what did we see there? So we have Macy as twin A, and we'll say Macy's sister is twin B in the green shirts, and then we'll say the little boy. Where was the little boy on the notes? Where was he defaulting to? Competing, right? How about Macy? Twin A. Also competing, right? They're like, no. My mom said it was sprinkling. My mom said it was raining. We're butting heads, right? We're both being assertive. Where was twin B? Where was Macy's sister? Compromising. She was like, whoa, whoa, whoa. Wait, back up, Macy. Whoa, whoa, whoa. Wait. Don't. Let's all talk about this. Every day. That happens, it's the exact, I mean, literally, this probably just happened in my house, in my nanny share. It did. Right, so we've learned these, we've practiced these, then we don't get to practice them anymore because the education system in this country is so focused on academics. That's a high horse thing. However, I do love case-based or project-based learning that a lot of schools have moved to, because you gotta be doing this stuff in project-based learning, right? So twin B is in the compromising. What did she particularly do that we want all Lend leaders to do? She was the one that's in a preschool class. Where did she default to? Where does she wanna go? What does she wanna go do?
Go see it.
Go see it. What would that be considered? Evidence. She wanted to go get the evidence. She wanted to go say, let's get the data. Let's go look out the window for ourselves. To heck with what mom said, to heck with what your mom said. Let's go get the data for ourselves. That's what we want Lend leaders to do. Right? So we got to kind of see this play out. Think about how this works in real life every day. Once you start seeing this, you won't be able to unsee it. It's one of those things. Like, oh, that's how Mario likes to go about these things. Oh, okay. The other thing, not just asking your supervisors, maybe if they have an identified mode that they typically use, but if they know, like, how the other people on your team do as well. So talk to your team members about it. But I know for sure that Jen is much more compromising and collaborating, and I can much more be more of the competing type, right? We know that about each other. We can recognize that. We can kind of call each other out on like, okay, you really gotta be more assertive today, Jen. And then Jen's like, you really gotta be less assertive today, Steph, right? Like, those are really important things to have open conversations about on a team. When we think about how do we get to that place, how did Jen and I even get to that place? Have those conversations with each other. Trust, right? Over time, you have to build that trust. And this is my good buddy, Abraham Maslow. People, by show of hands, who's heard of Maslow's hierarchy of needs? For the most part, almost everybody. So Maslow's hierarchy of needs is this assumption that if we have our ground level needs met, we can work up in terms of more specifics towards self-actualization, or kind of enlightenment is what it's been described to. But the idea that you can't feel loved and that you belong unless your physiological needs are met and unless your safety needs are met. And I consider safety and physiological needs to kind of also, there almost should be like another one that overlaps, like a Venn diagram, with psychological safety. Because physiological safety has to do with psychological safety as well. It's more that internal state, but it also is related to physical safety. So we've got to think about this. Do the people on your team, do the people you supervise, like we talked with Carrie last week, right? You're going to be supervisors, you're going to be mentors. Do they feel comfortable coming to you and saying, ooh, I didn't really like what was just talked about in class, and this is why? If not, explore that further. if they disagree with you on something that you do in clinic, in your clinical practice, do they feel comfortable coming to you and saying, how come you did it this way? I was thinking this was a different approach that I learned about in school. Right, so think about those things, and what type of supervisor or mentor, or what type of team leader you would want to be to build this space for trust and this safety. When we think about research on conflict, prior to the 1970s, the whole idea was to avoid conflict. It was very militaristic, like what the head honcho says goes, right? That's it. Everybody else falls in line. We have a chain of command. Everybody does what their assigned roles are. They don't ask questions. Then, when Thomas and Kilman got together and developed and disseminated this, I just lost my screen over there. They developed this instrument toward the late 70s. Then they started really kind of normalizing that conflict is important and natural, and that it has an impact on performance and productivity that doesn't have to be negative. The idea that you can have an organizational or team climate that is dysfunctional and has a negative impact on performance and productivity, or you can have functional conflict that improves performance and improves productivity, right? I would say we haven't had a cohort of Blend trainees who haven't had coursework in diversity and diversity of thought in the 10 years I've been doing this. Now, prior to that, there were people that I went to Lend with, their programs did not cover multiculturalism, diversity of thought, anything. It was all one way, right? And now the idea is we want to hear from everybody's perspective. Everybody has a voice at the table. Because that can lead to functional conflict, because that can push us further along and have a better outcome in the future. Some basics, quantitative studies in this area have talked about the conflict resolution styles of junior level and mid-level folks. What do you think that junior level folks might tend to default to? Accommodating, yep, accommodating and avoiding, right? Because they don't feel like they're in charge. They don't have that agency to speak up. We also have a lot of research in the nursing field that emotional intelligence, that's what the EI is on that slide. Emotional intelligence and conflict resolution styles have been studied together. And I'll talk about this as well, is that the more emotionally adept an individual is, the more likely they are to be able to map on a conflict resolution style that's needed in that scenario. So your mode isn't forever, right? You can morph between, you can change. And we also know that students are more likely to avoid, and many of you are still in training, many of you are maybe students, but you can shift, right? You can become more competing, you can become more accommodating, you can become more collaborative with training. So additional ideas that we know from research on conflict, it is very common. If you think you're going to enter into any healthcare team and not have conflict, think again. I'm here to tell you that's not true. It's gonna happen. Janetta, right? There's conflict, I'm sure, every day on both sides of that hallway. I'm checking one side and checking two sides. It can lead to missed work time, and missed work time leads to money loss, right? It can lead to mental and emotional health issues as well, right? I don't know about any of you, but it was a common thing in my doctoral program. You knew the people who were behind on their dissertation because they were the ones that were avoiding their research mentor. They were like seeing them in the hallway like, yeah, I ain't gonna talk to you because I don't want to be told that I'm behind, right? So a lot of social, emotional, and stress issues. However, conflict we know can also produce really positive benefits if it's effectively managed, right? People, you'll hear this throughout your career, people don't leave jobs, people leave managers. Okay, people don't leave jobs, they leave managers. And why is that? Because when issues like this arise, if your manager doesn't handle it correctly, that's going to lead to mistrust, right? And it's like, why would I want to continue in this role if this is going to be how future issues are going to be managed, right? So, in general though, in conflict, there's really limited research on interventions. Okay. So, all right, I don't know if I love this slide. give me feedback later. But research on conflict, we know that the greater levels of emotional intelligence equal the greater use of collaborating or compromising style and less often use of avoiding style. Right? If you feel more comfortable reading the room and knowing the emotional like situation and the context, you're more likely to say, yeah, I can do this. Extroverts, who are my extroverts in the room? There's more than 2 of you guys, come on. Okay, we're more likely to have higher levels of conflict, right? Okay, fine. We're less likely to use avoidance is probably the reason. Conscientiousness. I always found that this is one of the best compliments you can receive ever if you are conscientious. It just means that you are really insightful onto what's going on around you and within you. You have lower levels of conflict in general, the higher the level of conscientiousness. This is what research finds. Other contributors to research are personal motives, right? Like we talked about that. Is this even important to me? Like, I think you've heard me get on my high horse about something that Carrie and I are working on with getting information out to families. Like, it's really important to me that Cincinnati Children's, you can Google and it can give you information about autism spectrum disorder. Like, it's not fair to our families that they don't have that information at their fingertips. That's a personal motive. I'm gonna be way more likely to enter into conflict if somebody wants to say, no, we can't do this. You're like, no, we can do this, right? Your attitudes, your values, your knowledge base, right? You're not gonna argue about something that you know nothing about. You're gonna argue about something that you feel comfortable and knowledgeable about. So think about those intrinsic and extrinsic factors, personal or peer factors, all of those things that might go into what leads you to feel more comfortable or more confident in engaging in a conflictual situation. So, as I mentioned, students' preference is typically to avoid. With training, like what we're talking about today, some of the practices that we'll do next week, we know that research has said that those that are in nursing school and that are practicing nurses and then females are more likely to prefer compromising, but these preferences or modes or styles can change over time. So many of you are gonna get your reports back next week and you'll be like, none of this surprises me. This is exactly who I am. And then some of you are gonna be like, oh yeah, this is who I am at work, but at home, I'm completely different. And that's fine, right? We just want you to know those things about yourself. Why are some reasons for avoidance? Why would we avoid conflict? Get the mic and shout it out. Why would we avoid conflict?
To preserve relationships.
Absolutely, to preserve relationships. That's a huge one that I have. Oh God, I'm just not gonna say anything because somebody could be mad at me and then our relationship would be awkward and tense. Yeah, Archita? Do you want to wait for that?
To avoid becoming the bad person.
Oh, you don't want to be the bad guy? For sure. There's also a lot of fear of emotionality as we see on the screen, right? Like emotionality is hard for some people. It's like, oh gosh, somebody starts to cry. I don't know what to do with that, right? I'm scared. I'm not gonna bring it up because I don't want to deal with it. Yeah, sorry.
A lack of confidence.
A lack of confidence, exactly. You just might be like still living in that imposter syndrome world. Like, I don't even know if what I have to say matters. So why would I bring it up, right? Additionally, those that are like in a lower level, like a student or a traineeship, who do you have to go to help your career? You have to go get a letter of support. You have to go get somebody to vouch for you, be a reference, right? So there's that power structure that's really weird. Like sometimes you just feel like you're a pawn in this game and you just feel like you don't have much control, okay? Some other reasons when we think about that power structure, we have to consider age and generational differences. Anybody ever heard somebody say that millennials are awful? Because I have. Anybody ever heard people bashing Gen Z? Because I have. Guess what, guys? We all, as generations, have pros and cons, right? Everybody has pros and cons. And so those are gonna be some of the power differentials, of course. Brand new folks off the training, they may not have the historical knowledge, but they may bring other assets to the table. And so we have to consider those types of power structure differences. Lots of race ethnicity factors. So we talk a lot about culturally matched mentorship, culturally responsive mentorship, making sure that we're really taking into account some of those differences. Have to recognize my own privilege and when I'm mentoring other people, same as you go into mentoring. And then that training status, right? There's gonna be a different power differential between a first year medical student and the preceptor compared to a third level fellow and the preceptor, right? There's a level of collegiality that's very, very different and in that power structure. So hierarchies aren't going away. We just have to learn how to kind of navigate them. The other thing, anybody want to talk about the hidden curriculum? Anybody ever heard that term? Who's heard the term hidden curriculum? Nicole, can you describe what you know of as the hidden curriculum?
Like the things that you're kind of expected to do to be successful or to be considered successful, but no one tells you explicitly what those things are.
Bam! Okay, I'm glad we got that recorded because that was a perfect description. It is the unwritten rules to whatever situation you're in. So there's a whole hidden curriculum to medical school. There's a whole hidden curriculum to lead. There's a whole hidden curriculum to working in DPP. This, where I first heard about the hidden curriculum, was in the autistic community. There's books upon books on how to teach autistic individuals how to be in the world, because the whole world to them is one giant hidden curriculum, in many cases, right? So you think about, I always think about Arjita and Priya, like coming from, to the States, and they're, within 2 years, they have this whole new cultural experience. The United States is a hidden curriculum for many folks, right? Like, why do we do the things that we do? Sometimes I wonder. So it's our job as supervisors, mentors, preceptors to help illustrate for those individuals what that hidden curriculum is and be explicit. Because you don't want anybody guessing. That's not fair, right? It's not fair. All right, so some questions to consider. When is it appropriate to avoid conflict? What would be an example? When is it appropriate to avoid conflict? We talked about we want to maintain the relationship, but what more specifically? Yeah, Carrie.
Just thinking of a couple, like it's not a like emotionally, physically safe type environment.
Yep,
Or like concerns for like retaliation.
absolutely. If there's ever concerns for how that other person might retaliate, might react with big emotions in that moment, maybe that setting and in general is not the right time. So maybe it's like, okay, I'm gonna walk away right now. I'm gonna collect my thoughts and then I'm gonna come back to that person in 2 days or even in an hour. But this particular moment right now, I need to. When is engagement in conflict necessary? Arjuna? Yeah, the mic still.
When the situation has reached a stalemate and the issue has to be addressed for some kind of progress to take place.
Absolutely, so there's a stalemate. The other area that I think of that we don't oftentimes engage with is the emergency department. Right, there's a lot of assertive folks in emergency medicine, because they gotta get their point across and they gotta get their point across quick, because that individual could die, right? So, Carrie kind of alluded to this as well. Another question to consider is, do you personally have the time and the psychological energy to put forth into this difficult conversation? I can tell you I've mediated one challenging conversation between some folks, and we were there almost over 2 hours for one conversation. That was so emotionally draining. And I didn't do the best job of mediating it because I should have cut it off in no longer than an hour because we were just circling, right? If you're circling the drain and you're never getting anywhere, that's where we say, flush, take a time out, get the bad stuff out, let's move on, come back to it another day, right? So think about those things. All right. This is just a helpful tool that I got from one of the sessions that was done by our HR department here at Children's. It's just a cost benefit analysis. This is one of those things that maybe you print it out and keep it by your desk, or maybe you have it somewhere at home. What are the benefits of not having the conversation? What are the costs of not having the conversation? Oftentimes, those costs of not having a conversation may be the outcome of the project takes a hit. It takes longer to get something done, or your emotional capacity takes a hit. It's frustrating, you build resentment. Those are the costs, the personal costs. What are the benefits of having the conversation versus what are the costs of having the conversation, right? Time, effort, those are costs. So this is just there for you to kind of be a rubric and to kind of literally write it. Ooh, what are the costs? Take the time to think through. What are the benefits? All right, when we think about research in conflict, where do we see conflict in real life every day? Simon.
Like romantic relationships.
Romantic relationships, there's conflict all the time. You're learning how to live together. You're learning how to navigate managing a household potentially. You're learning how to co-parent maybe. You're learning just about each other's needs. Okay, so romantic relationships, where else? Arjita?
Parent-child relationships,
Parent-child
siblings,
relationships, that was my last one, but yes, good one.
siblings.
Oh, yes, that's why I keep telling my husband we need to adopt again, because Easton's gonna need to have a sibling so he can learn how to have roommates growing up, right? Roommates, your first roommate is your sibling. Tells you a lot about how you roommate in later life. Where else do we see conflict? Parent-child, romantic relationships. At work, for sure. Where else, Maddie? Were you gonna say at work or what, something else?
At work or Special Olympics.
Boom! I love it. I had sports on there too. And who's a sports lover like Jen and I, right? Those are always in competition. There's always a conflict. Right? The blue team wants to beat the white team. The white team wants to beat the blue team, right? That's always a conflict. You can't turn on, again, you probably don't watch the news because you stream all the things to avoid actual news channels. But we are in major conflicts across the world right now. Multiple places in the Middle East and in Eastern Europe. War is all around us at any given time, right? I have a picture of Judge Judy on here because there's always entertainment, but also there's always reasons for the judicial system. We talk about TV, there's so much drama and conflict. Man, Shonda Land does it well. That's why I have her picture of Grey's Anatomy and Scandal, how to deal with murder, right? But then also, we already talked about parent-child relationships, sibling relationships. Conflict is everywhere, okay? When I think about what went into this session, years ago when I was a Len trainee, we would always say, well, and that's when you have the crucial conversation with the family, or that's when you have to have the crucial conversation with the colleague. And I'm like, well, when are we gonna learn how to do that? And they're like, oh, you learn that on the job. I'm like, nah, that's not gonna cut it. So then I went to the Len director at the time and I said, we need to like enhance the curriculum in this area because I have not had some great supervisors that have taught me this, so we need to like learn about it in Len. And so she sent me to a training with this woman named Elizabeth Ryder. And she just put on a training around like sharing difficult conversations, sharing space during difficult, hard times, sharing diagnoses, and oh my gosh, it just opened my eyes. These were the first two texts that I used, the difficult conversations and the crucial conversations. They're both more businessy related, but they're starting off ones, which is why we gave you the crucial conversations, the red book in your Len bag at the beginning of the year. It's not for you to read cover to cover during Len, but it's there for you as a resource, as something on your professional shelf. When I think about expanding those conversations, there's so many more places, and particularly some really nice books have come out. The Difficult Conversations book has been updated, but Anna Sale, she has a podcast, and her book is also called Let's Talk About Hard Things. Things like, we always think that religion and politics and grief and loss are really hard to talk about, but why? Because we avoid it, right? Because we were always taught to avoid it. And if we just practiced it and kind of strengthen that muscle, we'd get better at it. So that's a good one. White fragility, and so you want to talk about race, are just two really good ones to talk about conflict that comes up between racial ethnic groups. And then lovely Brene Brown, We Can Do Hard Things. She talks a lot about difficult conversations and some of those, why are conversations challenging? Because of the shame, the embarrassment, the guilt, the heavy emotions. So what makes a conversation crucial? we've kind of alluded to it, but you have to have opposing sides, right? It doesn't have to just be two sides, it could be multiple sides. There also needs to be strong emotions, right? People that are really geared up, jazzed up to defend themselves. And to a certain degree, that perceived high stakes, doesn't necessarily need to be life or death, but perceived high stakes, whether that's the product, the relationship, the outcome of whatever the scenario is. So these three aspects make a crucial conversation. We're gonna take a break now, because I'm worried that folks are not tech on task, so we're gonna take a break, take a breath, come back fresh, tech on task, and we're gonna talk about what are our main objectives when we think about getting conversations going. Okay, so let's come back at like 2-ish, okay?
There's some candy back here.
Thanks, Jan.
It's sugar.
Bio break for those of you on Zoom land. So, okay, coming back together here.
The witchy mama.
All right. Got our chewy foods, we can always pass it around if we need to, I know I'm not gonna need some more. So, okay. The idea behind having a crucial conversation, as we talked about earlier, is getting all of the information into what the crucial conversation book calls the pool of shared meaning. I just call it, let's get the context all out there instead of focusing on the content. Right? The context is, gosh, I really feel attacked. Or I'm feeling so overwhelmed by this project. Right? Get the context, the emotionality out in the open. So when we think about what we have to do as part of this process, this is ultimately a slide that talks about the 9 chapters of the Crucial Conversations book. And typically the way I've done it is I do the first 5 chapters today and then cover the remaining 4 chapters next week, but I'm doing it a little different today. So this slide isn't as important, but we are gonna talk about, we have to start with ourselves. We have to get unstuck. And then we kind of, again, explore, what is it that's really driving me? What am I telling myself about what's happening? And then we'll go through the actions and the specifics next time. So when we think about what you have to do first, you have to work on yourself, right? So going back to what we learned in kindergarten, you gotta clean up your own mess, right? Not saying it's always a mess, but you gotta clean up after yourself. Figure out, what is this chronic thing that's happening that leads me to not be able to solve problems or not be able to get to my goals? And oftentimes when you're in the workplace, you hear people complaining about the same things. I think that's a red flag, right? That's not only just a red flag, but that's a, oh, this is an area we need to address. So questions that you might ask yourself are, what bad results are we trying to fix? Or what good results are we not able to get to right now, and why right now, and can we get there later? What problems are always coming up that we're trying to fix? And what do people complain about over and over again at home or at work, right? My husband and I would always have the same fight over cleaning services. He wanted me to do them. I said no, right? We're either gonna share the load or we're gonna hire somebody. We have not fought over cleaning in 10 years. I'm happy to report. And you know why? Because we just pay a lovely woman, give back to the economy, she comes in. And it's, right? We solve that problem together. Think about those things. Maybe not everybody's financially able, that's fine, but how can you get to a place where you can compromise and get to a win-win? Right? So what I want you all to think about is with the people at your table or around you, 3 to 4 people discuss, how did you get your way when you were a child? How do you get your way now? And think about that. Is that any difference based on what you did at the very beginning of the session on that style under stress? Like, were you more assertive, more kind of prone to that quote unquote violence, or were you more silencer and kind of more of that passive aggressive way that you got your way when you were a child? So just take a few minutes to chit chat about how you got your way when you were little and how you get your way now. And I'm gonna go on mute. And Sarah, can you just put them in small groups? So there's what, 6 of them?
Do you want them to be in one group or 2 separate?
I think one group is fine.
Okay.
Thank you. All right, let's start wrapping up your conversation.
Yeah.
Come back as a big group.
Yeah, like knowing that.
Oh, yeah.
All right, wrap up your conversation. As we have our friends from Zoom land jumping back in as well. Hopefully you guys had a good, robust conversation and got some laughs like the groups in here did. My favorite is always to think about one of our friends who said her parents were both engineers or one was an engineer and one was a CPA. And so they were very math-minded and analytical, and she learned from a very young age that she had to do PowerPoint presentations and bring the data. And one time she remembers doing a PowerPoint presentation on why she needed to get a dog at a very young age. So I thought that was fantastic. So yeah, anybody wanna jump in, be brave, and tell us how they got the way when they were a child? Doesn't have to just be in a room, it can be on Zoom too. Grab the mic. Julie?
I think I was pretty manipulative, that I'm the oldest, so I never had a problem asking for what I wanted, but if my mom said no, my dad would say yes, so I would definitely undermine. And I do not let my kids do that now as my own parent, but I use that pretty successfully.
So you were successful in using your resources and your knowledge of your relationship with your parent that said yes versus your parent that said no. Yep, okay. Not necessarily manipulative, that's your judgment. Doesn't need to be judgy. We're good. Just use your resources wisely. How do you get your way now?
I tend to just do it. I mean, I certainly have no problem asking for what I want, but I mean, I'll listen, in my marriage, I'll listen to Rick, but I'll still do it the way I do it. So, I mean, I'll play along and let him think he's got an opinion, but then it's generally not the right opinion. And he's very mathematical too. So, I mean, Christmas is always a surprise to him because I have a budget, and then he's generally surprised every year, that I squatted my own money aside and done it the way I want to do it. So I just get, I'm still just creative in how I get what I want.
Creative. Who else wants to share? Come on. Thanks, Taylor.
I'm just. Do you want to go first or?
No, go ahead.
Oh, sorry, I was thinking. No, you're good.
I asked a lot of questions when I was a kid.
Okay.
So I was like, oh, well, why can't I get what I want? So that was probably annoying, but I still do that too. I feel like it kind of if there's a conflict, I'm like, where are you coming from? So I can kind of understand what's going on and kind of get a big picture so then we can compromise. Sometimes that frustrates the other person if they're, trying to manipulate me into doing what, they want, or because they don't have a good reason. So that can, call people out for not. So that's worked in my favor a lot.
Yeah, asking a lot of questions, getting at the underlying rationale.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome. Great. Thank you. Taylor? I'm gonna let you off of the hook.
So as a younger kiddo, I don't remember ever having tantrums or anything like that. Just that wasn't really a thing in our household. But as a teenager and as I started to develop more attitude, I definitely was one for passive aggressiveness, the silent treatment. That was me. And that definitely helped me get what I want because my mom was a softie with that type of stuff. But as an adult, this was more difficult for me to articulate just because I don't know. I don't really make decisions based on other people. It's usually what I want to do. But in professional settings, I think I'm still pretty stubborn, but I think I've developed ways to say it in a more PC way, and a way that's more palatable for people. But
Palatable, yes. The things that go on in my house with my husband are not palatable for the workplace.
Yeah.
By any means, you missed that at the beginning, like, what, your style at home and your style at work are probably very, very different, or your style at school, so, absolutely. Yeah, thank you guys for sharing, appreciate it. So, going back a little bit. There we go. So we did our large group discussion. So when we go back to that style under stress that we did at the beginning, to kind of dig in that a little bit more, there's this continuum. And again, I don't love the word silence and violence, but the ideas behind it is that there's this big long continuum, and there can be a really, really far extreme and a really, really far extreme the other way. But most of the time we're defaulting to somewhere in between. And so when we think about kind of more of that silence, that's when we think more of that, like, understating our true opinions, or masking. And this is where we get into trouble by being a little bit more passive aggressive, right? Like, I'm gonna mask my opinion, like using sarcasm, using humor a little bit, right? So my example is, oh yeah, that'll work like a charm. People love to wait 3 weeks to see the doctor, right? That's not what I really intended, right? You can read through the lines a little, read between the lines a little bit. But again, going back to the hidden curriculum, some people don't read between the lines. So I gotta be very clear. Other times it's really just avoiding, like, how do I just steer away from this sensitive issue and bring up another topic? I'm gonna stay engaged, but I'm gonna steer away. So an example, speaking of work ethic, did you see that Emmy Awards last night? Right? How do you come back from that in a conversation when you are maybe the person that's trying to have a crucial conversation and the other person's like, what about the Emmys, Mary? Like, right? Like, you're just like, ooh, okay, let's bring it back. So avoiding, and then withdrawing, I mean, literally pulling out of the conversation, or those people that will avoid that person that they might be having a conflict with, to just not have it, right? Not have any interaction at all. My example is, I'm sorry, I really have to take this call. I mean, literally we've had an experience where somebody got emotionally charged and hit the leave button on Zoom. Like, please don't do that to anyone ever. Let them just say, I'm feeling big emotions right now, I just need to take a break. And just, then we can go off camera. But never just hang up on somebody in a professional setting, never just leave a Zoom meeting, right? Okay. Now, violence on the other spectrum, right? This idea of this spectrum is more of that assertive, aggressive kind of with your words, not necessarily violence with your actions, but kind of this controlling or coercing people to get them to think your way. Every time you hear somebody use extremes, like always, never, absolutely, that's this kind of idea around controlling of we tried it that way and it was an absolute disaster, right? Well, okay, that was 10 years ago. What if we tried it again, right? So those kinds of things of getting really people to kind of shift their way of wanting to engage in a conversation. Labeling, we might see this at times too, putting that label on other people or their ideas, just so that we can ultimately like kind of make a decision for the group. So you're not going to listen to them, are you? You know they're always out, right? How would you feel if you started to think about a group that way, right? It's really this idea of you're trying to sway other people's opinions, and then simply attacking, really trying to win the argument, we don't. Thankfully, I don't see this near as often. Making other people feel bad, making other people suffer, right? Thankfully, we live in a world that, I say we, as in like this field, this space, DUP, where people aren't out to like hurt each other, right? You likely came up with that because you're so indecisive, right? Just putting a generalization on somebody can feel really attacking to them. You may see these things in your career. You may have already seen these things in your career. So now just be more aware. Oftentimes people are kind of more in the middle. These are the extremes. When we think about how do we work through in preparation for a crucial conversation, we want to think through the why. So I love how Gabby brought up, I have to ask a lot of questions because I want to know the why. What is the why? What is your why for engaging in a conversation that might be uncomfortable? When we think about the motives for engaging in that conversation, or the motives to move dialogue along that are really kind of preferred or healthier, are to learn. Help me know the why. Help me understand the why behind this decision for this policy or procedure? Or why did you make that decision? Maybe it's to find the truth, which is little t truth, which is that person's perception of the truth. Or maybe it's to produce results, end up with an outcome, end up with a product, or to strengthen relationships. On the unhealthy side of motives, just being right, trying to save face, right? What does that mean? Just trying to look good in front of other people, right? Trying to just win an argument. I can say I have very unhealthy motives with my husband a lot of the times because I just want to win. There's times where I'm literally like, can you record that? You just said I was right. Mark the day, right? And using humor, but there's a lot of times that it comes from a place of like so frustrated that you don't listen to me. I just want to be right one of these times, right? Or worse yet, to punish, to blame, or we've talked a lot about avoidance too, right? So how do you get your place how do you get your mental and emotional capacity into a place where you're willing to learn, willing to explore that other person's perception of the truth, produce results, and strengthen relationships? That's kind of where we want to think through. So other things to think about that I really liked when I heard a talk about supervision and kind of this team leadership, or if you're a supervisor or a mentor or preceptor, what is the feedback purpose? Is it to blame? Is it to pass the buck? Is it feedback for correcting someone and helping them to see that there's other ways of doing a certain XYZ procedure? Or is your feedback to learn more and see where that conversation goes? I liked this way of framing it too, right? Because we really, as supervisors and team leads, we want to be in the place of giving feedback for correcting, for giving feedback for learning. Okay, so next is this idea, we got to share everything. We got to get it all out there, get the context out there. And so the idea is, how do we do this? When you're in a place where you're angry, when you're scared, when you're hurt, frustrated, you have big emotions. Insert any big emotion there, right? One of the quotes that has always stuck with me is this one. Watch your thoughts, they become your words. Watch your words, they become your actions. Watch your actions, they become your habits. Watch your habits, because that becomes your character. Anybody ever heard that one? I'm seeing some head nods, yeah. I love it. Probably what drew me to psychology, because what does this remind my psychology friends of? CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy. Your thoughts influence your feelings, which influence your actions, right? So think about, as we break these things down. What the problem is, though, is that when we are angry, scared, hurt, frustrated, big emotion, whatever it is, we go into fight, flight, or freeze mode. Or I've also seen fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. You can just explore these topics on your own. But we go back to ultimately this primal brain, where it's like we're just surviving. We have to just survive. And again, it doesn't matter if there's a snake that's potentially attacking us, or if it's that dissertation advisor that we haven't finished the work for, so we need to avoid that, right? We end up in this fight or flight state. And so this image is the fight or flight response. And really this is just to illustrate that it's the human body, and you have blood flow from the heart to the adrenal glands, and then onwards out to the extremities. But blood flow does not readily flow to the brain, right? Of course, enough to get your muscles to move, but you are not thinking coherently because you are not having the blood flow to the brain in the ways that you could if you were more calm and relaxed. Okay, so that's what this image is showing. Your fight or flight response is your just gut reaction, your survival instincts. Not, okay, I have an issue with Simon today. I have to figure out how I'm gonna sit and think about it. No. It's like snap judgment. Like, I gotta hurry up and respond, right? So Daniel Goleman is a researcher and psychologist, and his book, one of his original books was Emotional Intelligence. A funny story about this, we thought Jen and I were like up and coming, like land directors. We thought we were big and bad. And so we were like gonna call and bring Daniel Goleman to Cincinnati Children's. Guess how much he was charging? And this was like in 2014. Guess how much he was charging for a 1 hour talk? $25,000 plus a black car to be picked up at the airport and the highest level hotel room. We were like, okay, so we work for peanuts, so we are not bringing Dan Goleman to Cincinnati Children's Hospital. but he's a prolific writer in the area of emotional intelligence, and he talks about this idea of neural hijacking. So basically your frontal lobe gets hijacked, your amygdala gets triggered by the quick and dirty signal. And in this case, on this image, it's this snake. That quick and dirty signal gets sent to your thalamus and your amygdala, and you react, right? Again, this is evolution. We have to have it be this way. The problem is we don't have to have it be this way in a difficult conversation. Of course we do, if we're a real physical life or death threat, not in one of these crucial conversations, but our brain doesn't know the difference. That's the point. So that snake could be no different than this person who is our professor that we really aren't getting along, or our supervisor that we're. I am gonna go vomit in the bathroom because I don't have this person, right? So. Again, this idea, how do we master our story? How do we share everything in terms of that context? The problem that we're facing is there's a lack of blood to the brain. We're not able to share things coherently or share everything, right? So our solution is we have to figure out how to work with our body and what we're given to soothe ourselves internally and to read the room to figure out what to do next. That's hard. It's really hard work. Okay, so we have to learn about what your body does. So just by shouting it out, who has like sweaty palms? Who sweats when these situations happen anywhere? You're a sweater. I get lip sweat. You'll see me do this when I'm nervous. Like I'll get lip sweat. Ruthie's like, yep, I'm a sweater. Brad's raising his hand. Who kind of gets queasy or nauseous when they're nervous? Okay, so we got some nauseous stuff. Who feels like I just gotta run, I gotta get out of here? Yep, got some of that. Brad's like, yep, that's me too. Who feels like, oh my gosh, I gotta just get this done before I can move on with my day. I have to talk this through, I have to address this problem right now. Yep, or I'm gonna fester on it, I'm gonna ruminate, yep. And it's not either or. You could have these situations at any given time. I know I do my best thinking, my clearest headed thinking in the shower. Because I'm the most relaxed. All my senses are firing. I'm enjoying the hot water, the lovely soap smells. That's where I have my best ideas, but it's also where I have my best comebacks, right? For my husband, I'm like, I should have said that, right? Think about it. Why? Because my body's relaxed and calm. I have great blood flow to my executive functioning. I'm thinking about all the hypocrisies he hits me with every day, right? I can think through how coherently I want to respond. I just don't in the moment, because even as I'm talking about it, I'm tensing my body, right? My core is really tight, and you gotta learn how to identify that in the moment and then teach your body those small little subtle things. Okay, oh, I gotta unclench my belly, I gotta unclench my behind, I gotta unclench my abs, right? Like those are the things that literally people spend their lives work teaching executives to do. In my next life, I'm gonna be an executive coach. So. Okay, again, back to cognitive behavioral therapy. We take in what we see in the world, right? One of my friends who knows about cognitive behavioral therapy, can you describe what is the main example that we learn about in CBT? How is CBT taught to people? The example we use. Nicole, thank you.
We make a triangle that
Make a triangle.
has feelings and behaviors on it, and we normally do like an example about if you see a bear in the woods.
Go ahead, say it louder.
If you see a bear in the woods, what are your thoughts and feelings, and how is that going to lead to what behaviors you're going to have, which is going to be running away?
Right, so your thoughts are like, what? If you see a bear in the woods, what is your exact thought gonna be? Oh shit, there's a bear, I'm gonna die, right? And then how does it make you feel? Scared, frightened, and then what does that lead to your behavior? Run away as fast as you can. Another more subtle, less scary one that I oftentimes use is you see a group of people over across the room and they look at you and you perceive that they're looking at you and then they start to laugh. What do you think about in your mind? What's the thought you have? They're laughing at me. And then what's the feeling you have? Hurt, embarrassed, shame. What's the behavior? fight, flight, or freeze, right? Like, I'm gonna fight you guys. Why are you talking about me? Or I'm gonna run away and avoid those people. Or I'm just gonna get like stuck and ruminate. Why do they hate me? Why do they hate me? Why do they hate me? Right? But in CBT, we challenge those thoughts to say, what could they have been talking about? Oh, that Dr. Weber, she's the funniest teacher. Her students always laugh at her jokes. Ah, right? Come on, guys, ha! Okay, that they could have been talking about something positive about me, right? But in my mind, I go to the negative place. Okay, so that's the story that I tell myself. Every situation we do this, whether we are aware of it or not. We see and hear something in an environment, we tell ourselves a story. That's our thoughts. And sometimes those stories are very negative. Sometimes those stories are very distorted as well. That absolutely impacts how we feel. And then those feelings absolutely impact how we behave. Okay? So we have to watch these words that we use with ourselves. So how do we differentiate real facts from the stories we tell ourselves? Maybe not everybody wants to jump into CBT today. That's okay. CBT is awesome though. If you ever want to explore it, it's a fantastic intervention. But the fact of the matter is that group just was laughing. The fact of the matter is there's a bear in the woods, right? The story that I told myself is they're laughing at me and they're making fun of me, or that bear is going to attack me, right? Okay, so how do we differentiate that fact from the story? And this is where it takes time, and this is where it takes that energy and effort to calmly think through these things. The other things that we kind of want to be mindful of as we're exploring, working on ourselves, and thinking through, like, what do I put into this conversation when I'm ready to have it? We oftentimes, in that storytelling process in our brains, we guess other people's motives. Oh, God. What a jerk. Why are they laughing at me? Right? What a horrible person. So these stories we tell ourselves, these authors clump them into victim stories, villain stories, and helpless stories. I just think it's like, we just label people in overgeneralizations. The victim stories lead to like, oh, it's not my fault. You know, the other person is the one that's bad. They're a horrible person. They're dumb. I'm bright, good, and brilliant, right? But really then we're intentionally ignoring the role we played or the dynamic that has been created between us and that individual or us and that group. So victim stories can be problematic too. Villain stories is very similar, like, oh, it's just putting the blame on everyone else, but it creates that double standard that somebody else could just be having a bad day. And maybe that's why something came across wrong, or there was a miscommunication. And then finally, these helpless stories, I see this most often related to systems level issues. Oh, our system is just so broken, we can't fix it. Right? There's nothing else I can do. There's no other option, so I'm just gonna choose this really crappy option and justify it because there's no way to fix it. But really, we don't take that time to come up with alternative solutions and challenge the stories we're telling. So what I want us to stop and think about is what happens to get to a crucial conversation. Does it just happen overnight? Not usually, right? Usually it's cumulative unless something really egregious happens, like those microaggressions. I think, you know, we'll talk about DEI here in the 3 to 5 session again, but this idea of like microaggressions are like tiny little paper cuts over time. These things don't happen in big crisis modes. A lot of times the stuff in the workplace trickles like this in this crisis curve, right? So this is just the front end of the crisis curve on this slide. So you start off with just like, ooh, it's a little sharp, it's a little discomfort that I've got feeling somewhere in my body, right? It's another good thing to start thinking about. Where do you feel big emotions in your body? Not everybody feels them in the same place. So you gotta be aware of your own. It's like, ooh, doesn't feel right. Nothing's maybe not been said. There's something about, you know, just my experience, how I perceive what's going on. You just feel uncomfortable. Then you maybe have like a little incident, right? One of those little paper cut incidents. It's a short, sharp exchange, or it's something that like you feel triggered by or somebody else feels triggered by you. And there's a little bit of that irritation. And it doesn't have to just be irritation, it could be frustration, resentment, insert any kind of heavy issue, emotion. Then that kind of creates a cumulative experience that leads to additional misunderstandings, right? Because now you're telling yourself those stories, you're attributing negative intent. I can tell you, I play this out in my mind because there's one person in my life that is just incredibly challenging for me to work with. And I walked right up this multiple times in our relationship to the point where I'm like, ugh, all the way then it's tense. I'm like, God, I don't want to work with this person. Like, don't make me do it. Worried about it a lot, talked about it a lot in therapy. Then boom, we have a crisis because something happened. And then I'm like, oh, now I have to clean up this mess. We have to talk about it. It's exhausting. You will have these incidents, right? Like just know that going in. Again, conflict is common. But really that crisis state is behavior is affected. You're not able to get on in your day to day. You might miss work. They might miss work. You know, you might get into a major argument with your roommate or a loved one. And really you think about behaving in ways or you actually behave in ways that are really uncharacteristic of, right? There's things that I say and do at home and I'm like, holy cow, goodness, thank goodness there's no cameras in here, right? Not with my son, just my husband. Just with my husband. One of these days I'll invite him in and you guys can like actually meet him. It'll be interesting. He's more sarcastic than I am. He thinks he's funny too. That's the other thing that creates, it's an incident that just, he acts like he's funnier than me. I'm like, I'm not funnier than you. You are not funnier. Hashtag, it's not funnier. So, these skills, we've talked about a couple skills today. We've talked about separating fact from story. We've talked about those stories we tell ourselves where we're the villain, they're the villain, we're the victim, we're helpless. Now the idea is like the how to tell the rest of the story, how to come up with alternative solutions, right? So what I want us to do is, the idea behind like, what am I pretending not to notice about my role in the problem? And who might you need in your life to help point that out to you, right? You might need somebody. Jen, did you talk about Johari window earlier this year? Like, who do you need to like call out that part of your Johari window that's like just your blind spot, right? Like, I'm emotionally not seeing that part. Also, like, why would a reasonable, rational, decent person behave this way? Why am I, as a reasonable, rational, decent person, behave this way? Or what do I need to do right now to move toward what I really want? A lot of times we get stuck in this rut of like, oh, this isn't what I really want, but I don't even do anything because I'm just frozen in time. So telling the rest of your story. Because again, like we talked about with, you know, the brain the neural hijacking, we say things in exactly the wrong way at times. We don't say everything we want to say. And I love this quote to kind of think about this today. There's always a way to be honest without being brutal, right? And I love that some of the stuff that Simon's group has come up with, the anti-racism training, has talked about, like, how do we just come with curiosity? Like, can you repeat that? You heard a microaggression. Can you repeat that? Right? I'm gonna be honest. In my mind, I'm thinking, who says that? But I'm gonna be not brutal and call you out in front of everyone. Like, okay, I'm not gonna call you a racist in front of everyone. But I'm gonna be like, can you say that again? Right? So we're gonna learn some more skills next week, particularly around like what to say, how to frame it, how to move through a scenario. But what I wanted you guys to do today, Sarah has put on Canvas a PDF, and if you want to just use it electronically, I know some people like to type, some people like to handwrite, so we have the purple page that says self-reflection at the top. This is what I want to spend the rest of the time doing, along with your TKI. So if you get done with this, do your TKI. If you want to do your TKI now and save this for later, that's fine. But I want everybody to kind of work through this just front page, not the back page, not the practicing oils framework on the teal page, just the purple page that says self-reflection. Just work through those items. And then we'll kind of talk about it next week. But I'll just end with this quote because I love this one. Respect is like air. You don't really notice it until it's not there. Then that's all you notice. Pretty powerful. So I'm going to stop, see what questions we have in the room, see what questions we have in Zoom. Everybody ready to have crucial conversations? Julie is. Okay, I know.
For the assignment that we
Yeah.
fill this out,
No, you don't have to turn it in or anything. It's just for you to bring back next week. Because we're gonna use the scenario that you're kind of generating from your self-reflection next week.
Okay, sorry. I
Yeah,
just
no,
tried to-
you're totally fine. Nothing to turn in. It's really just for you to work through. As well as your TKI that was emailed to you by Vicky. And if you want a paper copy, I'll come around with some if you want to handwrite instead. No. Thank you. Yeah. I'll take it. Yeah. We'll bring some more of these next week, or if I run out, we can bring some more now today. Anybody else? Paper copy? Anybody else? Paper copy? Everybody on Zoom should have access to Canvas, so you should have it there, and then if you were here today, Nicole, Rhea, Megan, Ethan, feel free to join us next week as well. And if at all possible, in person next week, because we will be on some small group stuff. So. That's all the content I had for today though, so. Otherwise. We'll see folks at 3 o'clock for the next session.
have the capability to do that if they're not. Yeah, that would be really nice. Yeah, so thank you. I know. But this was well, Oh, you put them in, or you? Oh, okay. No, I haven't. Kind of like a little bit standstill. What? A lot of them are more like out of spring, so I don't know if they'll get back. But it's also like it's usually May first. Really not. Yeah. No. Well, the thing is that like on May 1st is when people admitted things.